This is Content, a bi-monthly podcast featuring the people behind the content. I'm Ed Marsh.
Today's guest is Sara Feldman, who has a great career in technical communication, but I know she's also in a manner of transition. Sara, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay,
a lot of people right now due to COVID.
Exactly. So I want to get to that, and talk about your experience and, what it's like, I think you're looking for jobs, so I want to know I'm curious about what's going on there first, but, first let's get to know you a little bit. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, how you became a technical communicator and, all the things that you've done as part of your career,
Absolutely. Happy to talk about that. So
Cool.
I got a rare, unusual start to technical communication, which is that I majored in it in undergrad.
Oh, no kidding.
Which you don't hear too often because there just aren't that many programs out there. Yes. In a room of technical communicators at conferences, I'm sometimes the only one, if not one of a few, who can say that. I got really lucky. I certainly had not heard of technical writing or technical communication before college. I went to a state school back in Virginia. I'm from Maryland originally. And my freshman advisor, I have a clear memory sitting in her office, and she handed me what at the time was the printed course book of all of the descriptions of the classes. And I was describing that I like writing, but I don't want to be a journalist or an author. And I like technology, but I didn't want to be a computer science major. I felt very in between. And she said, well, here's this thing called technical communication where you need to be able to write about technology. And I remember reading the description and thinking that it was a major that was made for me. So that was my start.
Wow. How lucky.
Yes.
The crazy thing about this career is that, in doing this podcast is I've seen so many people come at it from so many different ways. Mm-hmm. And I was a journalism major. So I, when I interviewed for my first technical communication job, I'm like, what the hell is technical communication? Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that, you found your niche quickly and you went with it, and you made it your career, because most of the people I've talked to kind of have had a roundabout way to getting here.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love hearing those stories too. I think it makes our profession and our peers really interesting. And I just happen to be the anomaly there. And there's so few programs. And in fact, the program that I graduated from doesn't exist anymore in its current form. It ended up getting folded under the writing and rhetoric program, I believe.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting change. So then, okay, so you went to college, you majored in technical communication. Mm-hmm. And how did you you found your job? How did you, tell us a little bit about your career after college?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, I'm from the East Coast originally, but I graduated college in 2007 and made the cross-country jump out to San Diego, where I've actually lived ever since. I didn't know that. Didn't know that at the time. Thought I'd try it for a year or two and see what would happen. But that worked out, and it was 2007, just pre-recession. So I was confident enough, or maybe naive enough, to move without a plan for a job. So that kind of unfolded organically once I got here. So I worked as a proposal coordinator for a technology company. And then I worked for a startup that was unsuccessful, but I learned a lot. And so I had a few different gigs, more short term. And then I landed my first official technical writing job actually in summer 2008. And that was for a company called ESET. And I spent 7 years there working with the knowledge base team.
Nice. I think I used they did antivirus, right?
Yes, they make antivirus software. That's right.
Yeah, I think I've used it. I think I used it in the past.
Yeah. So one of the things that I find a little bit noteworthy that I really appreciate about my career, that first job at ESET, is that the technical writing team there was quite embedded with the support function rather than some alternatives you hear about sometimes where tech writers are more with product or engineering or sometimes even marketing. So we were just lockstep with support from day one. And that gave me a really strong customer focused foundation, from day one, where I really learned the importance of how our work enables both internal and external customers to really be successful and managing both of those audiences.
Oh, interesting. We're going to have to talk about that a lot.
Yeah, so that's been a theme then throughout my career as I've evolved through various positions, and now focusing fast forward to more recent years when I was working for a SaaS company and more focused on content experience, which is a little bit more of like a holistic view of technical content strategy, and what I see now really as customer success enablement. So how do you take the technical product information that might be feature focused and transpose it to becoming knowledge that both internal folks and external folks can use to, be successful or get the outcomes that they're trying to achieve.
Huh. Okay, that's interesting because that was one of the things in my notes that I said, I looked at your LinkedIn and you're talking about customer success enablement. So I wanted to ask you what that is. And that's let's talk a little bit about that. So you're saying, so it sounds to me like it's kind of a transformation from the old kind of, here's this menu and here's what you could do with the things on this menu to what you say, knowledge that internal and external users can achieve. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, that they're trying to achieve outcomes. And this is the thing that I have to admit is something that I'm still practicing in my career focus in terms of how do we shift from this mindset of features and functionality and really transpose it into value-oriented outcomes for the end user. And the reason that it's tricky is because as technical communicators, we know that we're always thinking about our end user, but we're often still very much connected to the features and functionality conversation because that's our source, right? And
right. Okay.
And so I think for a couple reasons, which I can dive into, we as a profession need to go a few extra steps now to really translate that into the true customer perspective. So there's a couple of reasons for that one. And I've written about this on LinkedIn a little bit. One of which is that, as we know, technical content has now become relevant in the customer journey far sooner than it used to. We don't have these linear, buying cycles anymore now because all information is available all the time. And consumers are much more empowered to go self-serve, whether they're researching or, onboarding or, maybe upgrading in a product. Wherever they are, they're able to go grab that knowledge for themselves. And so the technical content that we create has to enable a wider scope of experiences.
All right, give me an example of that, a wider scope of experience. And I absolutely agree with you that, you're right, that people are looking at specs and are looking at the technical side, especially because they have access to that research, across any competitor. But, tell me a little bit more about what you're thinking here.
Just that so the example you just gave, yes, we could take our traditional user manuals and make those public. And so users or prospective buyers rather could research, company A versus company B and try and figure out who's the best fit. But customers, we could still get sort of stuck in that trap of then just presenting a feature focused knowledge experience. And that's not what the customer's thinking about. They're thinking about how can they get value? Like, what is the customer's ROI on using our product? So I talk about this also as customer value realization, and it's their ROI. They're spending money or time with a product or a company or a service, and they need to have some perceived return on their own investment. So how can we talk about our products in a way that makes it really clear how the end user is going to get benefit and value by using it? What are the outcomes they're going to be able to achieve? What will they be able to accomplish as a result of using our product or service?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, you're totally talking about the marketing angle there and saying, okay, and this is the question. This is an acronym that I use all the time, and I actually just presented at the Interchange conference, and my one of my favorite acronyms in TechCom is WIIFM. What's in it for me?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what people, I think you're right where we have to do that instead of that, that here's the feature focused content, the feature focused style of writing, and make it that what's in it for me, and think about the user as you said, but I think about them in a different way maybe, or position it in a different way.
Yeah. It's really embracing not just their perspective about what they know or don't know, but their context. And their context is about so much more than just how they perceive your product or service. It's everything in their life that we don't even know about that contributes to their context for interacting with us. So that has to do with, when and how they're interacting with us, whether that's over different kinds of devices like smart speakers or IoT devices. Right. So there's the actual delivery mechanisms that are different. And then there's just how much more embedded products and services are within folks' lives and intertwined with what they do from day to day. And also, I want to pick up on the fact that you said the word marketing, which I think is so interesting because as a technical communicator, as my background, I know I spent a lot of time thinking, and maybe I wasn't intentionally thinking this, so this is me calling myself out a little bit, thinking that technical writers are almost the sort of counterbalance for marketers in an organization.
No, I agree with you. I used to think this a long time too. Yes, yeah. I agree with you.
I think I'll admit I fully believed that, and I thought that was an important part of our role. Yes. Marketers have an important role. Thank goodness they help sell product, which we need, and then here's the tech writers to sort of balance out that that voice. And that's not really how it should be, right? We should be more aligned. And I've found myself in the last 5-ish years, maybe a little bit more, being drawn to actually content marketing focused advice. Especially, so I've mentioned this on another podcast recently, Think with Google is a resource that Google puts out. It's a research and thought leadership that's targeted at marketers. And of course, it's very SEO heavy and search based because it's Google, but they produce a lot of content that's geared towards that audience. And I found myself really finding so many takeaways that we could apply to technical communication by following resources like that.
See, that's interesting. I mean, I agree with you. I always believed that our role as technical communicators was somewhat altruistic, right. Which I think I've probably drawn to it because being a journalist is it's the same thing. I went to school for journalism, so it's like, okay, I want to be altruistic and I want to have the facts and be the gatekeeper of facts kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting, but again, it's as you said, as you're learning it and going through your career, it's like it is. It's another way of just breaking down those silos and saying, okay, yeah, I mean, yes, we're marketing is evil and they're selling a product with, sometimes less than altruistic means, but, we can be a part of that and help shape that message, which I think is really encouraging for those of us who have always toiled as kind of the folks who, just are back in the corner writing tech manuals.
Yeah. And I've observed that I think the voice and the perspective that technical communicators bring to the table is really getting embraced across the organization. So I'm seeing a lot more collaboration through my own career experience and through interacting with others, where you have your marketing teams bringing in that technical validation through technical writers to make sure that what the marketing team is putting out there is not fluff or BS, right? It's actually real value that the customers can get from the product. And that's also driven, of course, by how popular SaaS has become, or the subscription economy, that it's not just about obtaining customers anymore. We know that it's way more expensive to get a new customer than to keep them. And it's so easy for customers to leave. So organizations can't get away with tricking a customer into, becoming a customer, because they'll be out the door 5 minutes later. So they have to be accurate and be able to back up those statements.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, and back to the content marketing side, I went to a conference a few years ago on content marketing and realized, no, this is, even though some of the names were similar, like content strategy was a big thing there and stuff. I was like, this is not the world for me, but it's interesting. Like you said, it's easy for customers to leave. And that's, I think, in a lot of cases, what content now, especially in terms of if you're going to a website to buy something, I think content really matters, especially if it's good background content, like you want to learn something or you want to pick up a new hobby, especially if you're home or you want to grow something new or whatever. You go to websites that have great content and explain that stuff to you. I think that's not, I mean, a lot of that can be technical content as well. So you really, I think you could differentiate yourself with content is a big plus for companies, especially as so many people are and so many businesses are moving to an online model right now because they don't have a choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And the more helpful that a company can be via content to help a customer get that outcome, the value from the product or service with that technically oriented content, the more satisfied the customer is going to be.
So let's take a step back. I know we were talked about you were embedded in the support function in your first role,
Mm-hmm.
and it's interesting because, like you said, I've never been next to the support team. It's always been to the project management team to an extent, or some of the developers.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested how your experience was, being that close to the support folks, because I've used them as a resource many times. But there's a one company that that was wanted to hire me in the past or has expressed interest in the past, but technical writers were required to man the support desk for 6 months, and I'm like, that doesn't interest me. So I'm curious to hear what you learned and like what it was like for you, like kind of being on those front lines as opposed to a step or two removed from it.
Yeah, great question. And wow, it's one thing to expect folks to shadow support jobs, but to actually do the job for 6 months. I mean, I also would balk at that myself, but I can't help but respect it a little bit, right? I mean, what better way to make sure that your folks really understand what your customers need and what they're going through? So what was it like? It kind of was a boot camp all the time of seeing real time how the content you created could actually be used. So a busy support center, they actually had to either walk customers through troubleshooting steps or, configuration changes. And we could see real time what worked and what didn't. So whether the agents were using our material as a reference to walk customers through it or sending those instructions to customers via links to our knowledge base articles, or we actually had a whole set of email template scripts that we would maintain for the support team to use for our most common issues. And it was basically that accepting from day one that customer support perspective and the customer perspective through that voice, that they were always right. And we could have written what we thought was the best technical documentation based off of the features, but it's that constant understanding of how this is really used in the real world.
Were you there? Like, you said you were kind of ghosting the team. Were you there when like they get frustrated? Like, were you listening in on calls and say like hearing the frustration on both sides? Or, I mean, what was your kind of role there?
It was more about, I mean, yes, some of that for sure, but it was more about partnering with the support team and having them become a part of the content improvement process. So they knew that we considered them are part of our customers, right? For us, customer support, customer care, as it was called there, like they were our customers just as much as the company's customers were our customers. So they had a voice in continuously evolving the content. So through real-time feedback mechanisms, or when we had bigger initiatives going, bringing them in early on to capture their perspective as part of the requirements or goal setting. So yeah, it was more about partnering with them.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. So yeah, so yeah, it sounds like made them an integral part by being able to write and everything. That's that's useful, and I'm sure that sounds like it went well.
Yes, I think it did.
Nice.
I look back on it fondly. Hopefully they do too.
Probably. So it sounds. I mean, this is a theme throughout your career. This, this customer success enablement, and you've moved on to, different roles and everything. So, tell me a little bit. I guess where you are now in your career. It's been a few years. I know you're, like I said, you're, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, you're in a transition phase. So,
Mm-hmm.
what's what are you thinking about now, and what are you looking for, and kind of what are you seeing out there in terms of roles of what the kind of things that we do?
Yeah, great question. So the tricky thing is that for wanting to be someone to be a whew, for wanting to be an effective communicator, here we go. That's foreshadowing for what I'm about to say. The focus that I really enjoy in terms of how I can help in an organization, there is not one or even just a couple job titles. There's no standardized job titles around what it is that I
Right.
focus on in an
Yeah.
organization. It's a very cross-functional, internal, external communication role that, so at my previous job, part of the time I was embedded with the customer advocacy team. And then at some point I transitioned over to the product team. And really
Okay.
my job was the same or quite similar with
Hmm.
both teams because I functioned as kind of a go-between. So I was the
Okay.
person that would help take the product knowledge, whether it was product planning or go-to-market activities, and help make sure that our customer-facing folks were informed about what was changing with the product and what new features and functionality were and what problems they were intending to solve for, and working with them and sometimes customers directly to understand, here's this new feature. Now, how can we make sure that the customers are using it and that the customers are having successful outcomes? Because it was B2B. So in that case, we wanted our customers to
Okay.
be successful with their own customers. So looking at that whole, yeah, that whole cycle. And so at MindTouch, where I was before, my role for a while was called Content Experience Manager. And that just was kind of a label for looking at content touch points across the customer journey. So collaborating with marketing and sales and services and support and success and
Jeez.
product. Yeah. To make sure that everyone internally is speaking the same language and understands
Huh.
what's the value proposition? Why is this going to help our customers solve problems? And how can we all, it's a lot of knowledge management is a big component of what I do in organizations.
Okay.
And then obviously technical content strategy to make sure that we're
Hmm.
delivering that knowledge to customers when and how they need it.
So I mean, the theme I'm hearing with you, and pardon me for being reductive, but you sound like you're the glue between a lot of divisions and a lot of teams and companies.
Yes, that's one way to put it. Another way that I've been saying it lately is I connect the dots in an organization
Okay.
that sometimes might have little gaps. Like, teams sometimes get really close to communicating very well, but there's a couple dots missing, and it's
Okay.
knowing, it's being technical enough to understand the technical side of things. But I joke about this that sometimes it's helpful for me to not be too technical because it helps me maintain that customer experience to know how this will actually be perceived by folks who aren't collaborating with engineers every day to understand what's happening.
Well, yeah, and that's, one of the things I said too. I always say that technical writers are librarians, detectives, and translators. And it sounds like you like filling that role of the translator between, the technical and, like they said, the user, making sure that, yeah, like you said, connecting the dots and making sure everyone understands the language that everyone's using.
Yeah, I love that. I love that summary. Yeah, a translator is a great way to say it. So some of the roles out there so these are functions that I've done or roles that I'm exploring for my next move would be like technical evangelism is one sort of
Okay.
aspect of it, and that's doing a lot of industry engagement. presenting at conferences, which I know you like to do, which is one of my favorite ways to interface with the industry and learn through presenting and through interacting with other presenters and interacting with audiences real time to try and help them, evolve their own practices, and doing that in a way that maintains or communicates what your product value proposition is. And then another one is like product marketing as a function is another role that I've seen that I've contributed to before, which is sometimes embedded with the product team, sometimes embedded with marketing team. And it is a little bit more of a marketing oriented role where their job is to make sure that the product features and functionality are getting communicated out as outcome-based value.
Okay, outcome-based value. That's a good term. I want to write that down. So that's interesting. And like, I wonder, I mean, let's talk about conferences. Everything's virtual now. I mean, how is it? I mean, I know this is a role that you're looking for, but it can't be easy to be getting your brand out there, or like you said, you can't. It's hard to evangelize when everyone's not together, or not in a somewhat controlled setting of a conference venue.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think we're still so much at the beginning of everyone figuring out exactly how that's going to work going forward. So I know that STC Summit is coming up next month, so I'm excited to be a part of that. I mean, obviously there's some things to be disappointed about that it's going to be a virtual only format, right? There's going to be things that we miss about the in-person format 100%. But then, there's silver linings that come out of it. Like one of which is that I'm sure you can relate when you go to a conference and there's multiple breakout sessions at the same time and you're making tough decisions about which one you're going to go to and you're missing that chance. And now you can just press play an hour later on that session that you missed. So I think more folks are going to be able to glean more takeaways, as a group from that conference format.
Yeah, what I'm interested in, and I'm sure this is going to be difficult for any conference at this point, but it's that back channel, it's that conversation between the sessions, or you bump into somebody, like I mean, I always advocate this. I've always said, you need to be on social media, you need to be on Twitter, and it just makes it easier to interface with people in person, like. People that I've known for years virtually, you meet them in person and it's, oh, hey, it's you, you get to meet that person. And I don't know, I don't think it's going to be exactly the same, but I'm curious to see how, those channels come together, because at this point in my career, like, I've done a lot of this stuff. So some of the sessions don't have as much value for me as they used to. So, that in between session, or that networking part of it, that that in between the sessions, or just catching up with somebody, or missing a session to just bullshit, and or even I mean, a lot of conferences have karaoke, which is an evening in itself. So it's interesting to how that all comes together. It's interesting to see how this is all going to evolve.
Yes, I'm curious as well. I know that they're trying to set up virtual hallways, like quite literally. So
cute. Okay.
It will be interesting to see how those work. You said I know you presented at a conference just last week. How did that go? Were they able to replicate the in-person format?
Well, I think they had an intention of having just a background chat room, but because of the technology, the screen sharing and that technology that I chose, you could only have one session open at a time. So you had to be either in one, presentation A or presentation B. So there was some conversation there in the chat room, but I think, it was, I think it was missed. It was great because, I did the keynote session and there was a lot of conversation afterward. It was very lively, but I don't think you captured that, whispering or sitting next to a person and taking notes, or, like I said, going outside and grabbing a cup of coffee, or, just missing a session and hanging out. It wasn't, that wasn't quite there yet. And I know, I mean, it's really early days.
Sure.
So, and I'm going to be at STC Summit. I was supposed to receive my associate fellowship. So,
congrats.
Yeah, I'm doing it virtually, which is, a little bit disappointing, but I'm interested to see how this all comes together,
Yeah.
especially because, there's so many different ways to communicate now, whether it's a Slack channel or whatever. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that Felice Banner is doing it and she's done a great job with LavaCon virtual stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm sure they'll have a good handle on it, but I'm just curious to see, how this, like I said, how it evolves and how has this become somewhat the new normal-ish if more conferences are going to continue to do this and all are there I mean how much of the physical component is going to remain at some point.
Yeah, that remains to be seen for sure. And I will be you won't be able to hear me, but I'll be cheering for you from the audience when you get your award.
Well, thank you very much. I'll take the virtual kudos.
Yes. Good.
So you said, going back to, your job hunt now, it's like, and there's not one standard role title. So this is a thing that, this is a theme for me through this whole damn podcast that I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
there's too many names. There's too many things for people for what we do. But I'm wondering, are you finding that a hindrance? Are you finding that an opportunity? What are you, I mean, and what kind of things are you looking for in a role right now?
Oh, great question. Hindrance versus opportunity. I would say both. There's
Okay.
definitely things about it that make it more challenging. I can't really go on to ZipRecruiter and type in a title and find, a bunch of listings that apply to me or LinkedIn jobs, whatever it may be. So that's the challenge, the hindrance a bit. The reason that it's potentially good or how it has been so far for me is that it requires a lot more conversation. So the
Okay.
opportunities that I'm exploring right now, very few of them are happening via me finding just a job posting and applying to it and then seeing what happens.
Okay.
The nature of my network connections anywhere, I'm doing a lot of like networking, reaching out to people individually. People are reaching out to me. I'm posting things on LinkedIn about what I'm interested in. So I'm trying to have more of a conversation. And then through that conversation, the
Okay.
right kinds of opportunities are finding their way to me so far. No winners yet, but things are moving in the right direction. And I think it's contributed to having more in-depth like conversations about the right role and really actually finding roles that will ultimately be a better fit because it
Okay.
requires sort of some like context and orientation to even have the conversation in the first place.
Hmm. Oh, that's interesting. So how is your experience with LinkedIn been? I mean, obviously that is the place to go for
Mm-hmm.
networking, and I assume that it's, it sounds like you're putting some content out there. So what's the engagement like for something like that? Like thankfully I haven't been in the job hunting mode for quite some time, so I really haven't really had to look very hard with LinkedIn. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious how, especially, putting something out there, like putting some content out there and putting your posts out there. What's that like? What's the engagement like, and how has it been for your job search?
Yeah, great question. So the engagement can be hit or miss. I will be honest about that. And I think that's worth being honest about because if other folks want to try it, you shouldn't be discouraged if 9 out of 10 things you put out there have little to no engagement, right? That might happen. But if you keep kind of plugging away at it, if you keep following and engaging with people who are talking about things that you're interested in, over time, it reaps rewards. So I've actually, a couple years ago, I posted an article on LinkedIn about how I had found my previous 2 jobs via LinkedIn without applying to jobs. And that was
Oh,
because
that's cool.
being in the right place at the right time or posting the right article about something that I was interested in professionally, getting found via keywords by a recruiter or a hiring manager. That happened a couple times for me in the past successfully. Now, I have to point out, and I put this in my article very clearly, that when those conversions, so to speak, happened, meaning it turning into a job, it was never right away. There was like almost a year both
Oh,
times in
okay.
between the activity that I did and it turning into a job opportunity. So it really is a long game, or it has been for me. And so it's something that I
Oh, interesting.
just am kind of always doing on the side anyway. And I approach it
Okay.
from the perspective of just wanting to learn. I mean, LinkedIn, there's so many people on there. within your industry, within adjacent industries, which I've already talked about. We can learn so much from adjacent disciplines like content marketing. And so I think it's such a great place to kind of hang out for professional development reasons anyway. And if as part of that, you are contributing to conversations and or trying to start your own, over time, you're just going to have this sort of momentum built up that hopefully when you need it to can convert into an opportunity for you.
So, I mean, I guess my question is, well, not, I'm asking this badly, but if you're someone new to this, where do you start? You know, I mean, and I guess, you know, where do you start? And have you also used other forms of social media, or have you kind of focused solely on LinkedIn to get the word out there and stuff?
Where to start, I would say, well, this is what has worked for me, which is that I see what other people are doing that interests me, and I just kind of join in. So I don't think that I'm any sort of original innovator in using the LinkedIn platform. There's a lot of momentum that you can pick up on and just kind of participate in. And where it's important to be original is not like how you use the platform, but I think it's the voice or the perspective you bring to the subject matter that you're interested in, right? Each of us has different experiences and something of value to add to our peers in our network. And so if you approach it from that perspective, how can I help also contribute to like the learning and knowledge sharing that happens on this platform through the ways that you see other people doing that? And that's whether it's using posts or articles or commenting or using hashtags. I mean, that's the sort of like mechanics of it that I tend to sort of either follow what seems to be successful by other people or try a few things, and eventually you kind of figure out what works. So I approach it from that perspective. Twitter, for me, I use Twitter also for professional reasons, but I haven't had as much success on Twitter personally. But I can say that I've spent a lot more time and focus on the LinkedIn platform rather than Twitter. So I think you could probably talk to someone else who's maybe had just as much or more success using Twitter in the same way.
Okay, that's fair. That's interesting. I mean, you know, like you said, it's a long game. It's like, you know, and especially in terms of networking, like you never know if you plant a seed now or you can make a connection now that could pay off somewhere down the road. And you know, I've had several experiences with that. Like, oh, you know, even if someone's requesting like a resource, oh, do you know anybody for X or whatever? You know, it's someone I would, you know, I've had so many of those casual experiences. Like, oh yeah, I remember when we were, that network really, really is important. And it's, I think that like you said, it doesn't matter what role that network is in, because you never know where the opportunity is going to come from or when it's going to come.
Yeah. So I think if you just stay focused on, like I said, kind of what interests you and what conversation do you think you can contribute to, and you focus there, because it is such a long game. You can't necessarily know that, oh, doing this exact thing right now is going to get me this exact result. You don't necessarily know what the result is going to be, but that if you build a habit of contributing to a conversation that's meant to improve things from a professional perspective, that eventually that's going to lead to good professional outcomes for you.
Yeah, that's nice. So I want to pivot a little bit, because, I think you and I have been discussed back and forth, you having you on the podcast for a while, and we were introduced by our mutual friend, Ben Welk, who has the Introverted Leadership podcast. And I know that you were a guest on his podcast. So how does that affect the way that you go about your promotion and your job searching and all of that?
Great question. It does in some ways, but it doesn't in ways that I think people assume it does. So let me explain. The way it does affect is that, to repeat a phrase you just said, put yourself out there. When you publish stuff, and I kind of mentioned this before, maybe 9 out of 10 times that you put something out there, no one's going to give a shit. And you have to be prepared. And as an introvert, I think others can relate that it's not, as much as maybe you're great at collaborating, it doesn't necessarily, when you start to shift into that territory of like vulnerability and putting your opinions and putting yourself out there instead of your work out there, it can feel, it can feel vulnerable. And so it's just kind of trusting the process and knowing that as a professional, you have something to contribute to this conversation. You have your experience to share, and knowing that there's really nothing bad that can come from putting it out there. The worst thing is that you didn't get as many likes as you hoped you might, right? We all have egos, and so that, plays a part. But knowing that that's not the point anyway, right? The point is to practice knowledge sharing. And so kind of separating it mentally that way, that this isn't, if you think about it as putting yourself out there and suddenly you're in this scary, vulnerable spot, you're going to be so scared you're not going to do anything. And if you think of it more as you're just contributing to the conversation and knowledge sharing with your peers or your network, then, you would hope that people are doing that for you. So you should do that for them. So that's the way that I think it does play a role. And then where it doesn't, but in the sense that I often hear people talk about introverts, I think a lot of times people think an introvert is a synonym for being shy or reserved. And in my experience, that's certainly not the type of introvert I am. I've described myself before as an outgoing introvert. Being an introvert, you don't have a handicap from collaborating with people, right? You're not at a disadvantage. All it means is that when you need to recharge, or this is my interpretation of when I'm not an expert like Ben, my interpretation is that when I need to recharge, I need to do that in my own quiet alone time, right? So I have to think about how my energy gets consumed and restored. And so I need to plan ahead. If I'm going to be interacting with a lot of people, I need to plan ahead to have some downtime after. Before a big conference, I said this term before. I don't know if I'm going to remember it. I think I said pre-charge. So there's recharge after the fact. And then I actually, if I'm heading to a conference on a Monday or Tuesday, that weekend before, I'm probably not hanging out with my friends as much, because I know that I'm kind of conserving my energy because I need that quiet downtime to recharge or pre-charge. But there's nothing about that takes away from my ability to collaborate or interact with people.
That is so awesome. I have to say, I've never always been kind of skeptical of the introvert versus extrovert thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then recently I've realized, hey, you know what? I'm actually more of an introvert than I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, like you said, I'm an outgoing introvert. You put yourself out there, you do you present, obviously I'm putting myself out there presenting and doing the podcast and things like that. But I realized, like you said, you need a way to recharge. And I didn't realize that was what I needed until fairly recently. So I guess I'm an admitted, I guess I'm recently realized I'm an introvert, especially because I love this whole being home thing, working home all the time. Like you said, we chatted a little bit beforehand, and, we're both homebodies. It's like, oh, okay, I can live with this. It's kind of interesting.
This suits me.
Yes, it suits me, even though, I like presenting and I like you said, putting yourself out there. But I guess, like a podcast is a controlled experience. So maybe I'm putting myself out there in an introverted way. It's, I have a lot to think about now.
Yeah. That's great. And I think it's something to sort of like continue exploring, and it's going to change. I think it's going to change throughout our lifetimes. I didn't know I was an introvert until probably after college. And now when I look back at some of, I was like always around friends in high school and college. And sometimes I think I didn't realize that maybe I was wearing myself out and not getting the kind of recharge time that I needed. So it was a surprise discovery for me later in my 20s. Like, wait, what? I'm so social. How could I be an introvert?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. Crazy stuff. So, well, I guess to pivot on that too, you've also been a big member of the SDC San Diego chapter. I know you're a past president and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Have you tapped into that network? How is that? Is that where, are you using that as part of your network, and tell us a little bit more about your history with the chapter.
Oh yeah, so volunteering with the San Diego chapter of STC has been a huge benefit to my career, both like directly and indirectly in terms of my actual jobs, like learning things that I can apply to my job, expanding my network, getting familiar with, adjacent roles that might be good for me to be familiar with. And then of course the people. So I do, during this career transition time, I've heard from so many people, who've reached out to me. It's almost overwhelming in the sense in terms of how appreciative I am of hearing from
Nice.
folks. And so many of those connections I've made through STC San Diego.
Awesome. That's very cool.
Yeah.
So, usually I start to wrap things up with a question of, what do you like to do when you're not talking about technical communication, content strategy, role, but let's expand on that a little bit. Like, what tell us a little bit more about what you do when you're, with your downtime, and then maybe, let's talk a little bit about, is there anything that you've done, if there's anything you've done or expanded or learned since we've been under quarantine for COVID-19?
Yeah, great question. So in my downtime, because I do have a pretty busy career and spend extracurricular time with STC San Diego, in the downtime that I do have, I'm a big fan of relaxing. I said this to someone earlier today. I said, I like the word leisure. And I think sometimes there's a bit of pressure to be someone who has a bunch of hobbies and can talk about them all the time. And honestly, I have a lot of respect for those people because I think that they lead more interesting lives at time if they can talk about their rock climbing adventures or whatever, extracurricular activities they have. But for me, I like to recharge with relaxing downtime. So that's hanging out at home with my loved ones, my dog, long walks, going outside, trying new restaurants, lots of Netflixing, YouTube I find is really fun for me too, because I get to relax, but also like learn about other people's lives. It's like, kind of to use your words, like it's the introvert's way of like being social. And working out when I can. When we used to be able to go to the gym, I hope to be able to return to that when I can. So that's my downtime. And then I'm close with my family. So traveling back to the East Coast a lot to see them when I can. Or, we're big fans of Snapchatting each other pointless things all the time. So it's a big source of entertainment.
Yeah, I've spent so much time watching YouTube. I love it. It's like I don't watch that much TV anymore. Of course, we watch Netflix and we've been binge watching stuff, but like my day to day is like it's like YouTube now, and I just like you said, it's so amazing, so many things that you can learn. So yeah, I mean, what have you been watching on YouTube? What have you been learning about?
So a couple of my focuses. So if you looked at like what the algorithm has decided that I like, the topics are often around like DIY and home improvement.
Okay.
I'm really interested in people who do sort of the like woodworking projects for their house. I don't have any power tools unless you count like a battery operated drill. We just don't have we don't have the space for it where we are right now. But I love watching that stuff, and because I think watching that creative process, them creating something, is really entertaining. And maybe someday I'll be able to use that, right? If I move to a spot someday with a big garage or a workshop, maybe one day I'll make use of it. And then another sort of version of that is I love watching artists on YouTube. And I am not an artist at all. I have no aptitude for painting or drawing or anything like that. But I love watching other people create that type of stuff. And there's some great artists on YouTube that I just think it's fun to watch.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I watch a lot of comedians, like stand-up comedians. Some guys are doing some really, really good stuff. I started following a lot of Midwestern comedians. It's very interesting.
Oh.
It's some really crazy stuff. Fun stuff out there. And a lot of well, not music videos per se, but there's this one guy, his name is Rick Beato, Beato. And he does this, he's a fantastic musician and producer, but he does this series called What Makes This Song Great.
Okay.
And it's just like different songs, like, and he breaks it down, and like he has the individual tracks, and he like just mutes the other things and like plays along with them. it's so fascinating, and he's so good at it. I could just watch this guy for days, and I
Oh, that
have.
sounds really interesting.
It's so fun. And
That
then I
re-
have a
Go ahead.
yeah. No, sorry. It was just it's so fun to watch. He's got like 80 episodes of this, and it just transcends music. It's just amazing.
I'm definitely going to look that up. I love that it kind of dissects the different elements that create what we, Yeah, and I'm not good with like music trivia, or like can't actually carry a tune. Singing in the shower or the car doesn't count. But I love the idea of like learning about sort of what makes a song. I say a boppy song. What makes a song something that you kind of want to bop your head to?
Yeah, I'm a drummer, so a lot of the stuff that he talks about technical is like way over my head.
Uh-huh.
But even so, just the thing like how it was put together and everything, it's just it's so much fun. And like I'm just finding that I need a lot of stupid stuff, I guess. Like I'm watching Match Game from the 70s because it's just like comfort food for me, because I grew up in the 70s and I remember watching Match Game, and now being older and seeing all the innuendos and understanding what they mean, it's a very different experience. But it's like sometimes I see like, okay, I just needed to have something mindless at the end of the day to turn my brain off to.
Yes, and I think we should all feel very entitled to indulge in that during this very
agreed
uncertain time. So
well, I'm glad you're holding up well. I hope you and your family are doing well through all this. But Sara, it's been great to talk to you. I'm glad Ben introduced us. I know we talked about it here and there. We finally got the time to put it together. So thanks for your insight. It was great to talk to you, get to know you a little bit better. Can you tell us where we can find you online?
The best place it would be on LinkedIn. So the LinkedIn URL /in/Sara Feldman, SARA Feldman, FELDMAN. Or I'm on Twitter at Sara ContentWise. And feel free, anyone can ping me anytime on either of those channels. And it was so fun talking to you, Ed.
Yes, awesome. Thank you. So, good luck with the job search. Let us know, keep us up to date with what's happening.
I will.
Of course, if there's anything I can do, please let me know. But until then, go out there and create some great content, everybody.